Ambassador Tom Reed's footsteps echoed through the gleaming hallway of the Stellar Assembly's main education facility. The walls shimmered with a pearl-like finish that was both beautiful and somehow cold. His guide, a tall blue-skinned being who had introduced itself simply as Mentor, led him deeper into the facility. And here, Mentor said, its voice carrying that mechanical precision all aliens seem to have, "We house our young during their crucial development phase." Reed nodded politely, though something about the word housed made his skin crawl. He had been on this diplomatic tour for hours, and this was the first mention of children. As Earth's representative to the Stellar Assembly, he needed to understand every aspect of their civilization. The corridor opened into a vast chamber filled with rows upon rows of sealed pods. Each was about the size of a small bedroom, glowing with a soft internal light. Reed stepped closer to one, his reflection distorted in its curved surface. "May I?" He gestured toward the viewing panel. "Of course," Mentor replied. "This is what your species would call a 6-year-old. Reed peered inside, and his blood ran cold. A small alien child sat alone in the sterile chamber, surrounded by learning terminals and feeding tubes. The child's eyes were focused on a screen, its movements mechanical and practiced. There were no toys, no decorations, no signs of comfort or joy. "How long?" Reed's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "How long do they stay in these pods?" "The standard development period is 10 cycles," Mentor said proudly. "It ensures optimal learning without emotional contamination. All spacefaring species follow this practice. It is the mark of a civilized society." Reed's mind raced to his own daughter back on Earth. He pictured her running through their backyard, laughing as she chased butterflies, crying when she scraped her knee, curling up in his lap for bedtime stories. His heart ached for the child in the pod. "All species?" he asked, fighting to keep his voice neutral. "Naturally. How else would one properly develop the young?" Mentor tilted its head, genuinely puzzled. "I understand your species has not yet implemented this system. It will be a necessary step for your admission to the assembly." Reed's diplomatic training warred with his parental instincts. He watched as the child in the pod mechanically completed some sort of puzzle, received no praise, and immediately began another. No smile, no sense of achievement, no joy. "And they have no contact with their parents during this time?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "Parent contact would introduce emotional variables that interfere with optimal development," Mentor explained, as if this should be obvious. "The pods provide all necessary nutrition and education. We have perfected this system over thousands of years." Reed walked down the row, each pod revealing another child in isolation. Some were even younger than the first, barely more than toddlers. His hands clenched into fists behind his back. "Your heart rate has increased, Ambassador," Mentor observed. "Are you unwell?" "Just taking it all in," Reed managed. "This is very different from Earth's methods. Yes, we understand humans still cling to primitive practices, but once you join the assembly, we can help you correct these developmental flaws. Imagine your species finally free from the burden of emotional attachment." Reed couldn't imagine it. More importantly, he couldn't imagine forcing it on humanity's children. As he followed Mentor back to the main hall, his mind was already composing the emergency report to Earth. The Stellar Assembly needed to understand that humanity would never accept this. Not in 1,000 years. Not ever. As they reached the exit, a sound stopped him. Faint through the thick walls of a pod, but unmistakable. A child's sob. Reed straightened his shoulders, his decision made. Humanity would not be joining the assembly. Not under these conditions. Some prices were too high to pay. Some lines couldn't be crossed, and forcing children into isolation. That was a line humanity would die defending. The main chamber of the Stellar Assembly buzzed with agitated voices. Hundreds of alien representatives filled the circular room, their different shapes and colors creating a living rainbow of movement. At the center stood Ambassador Tom Reed, his back straight and his jaw set firmly as he faced the Assembly's High Council. Lead Council Member Vale, a tall figure with silvery skin that rippled like mercury, raised all four hands for silence. The chamber grew quiet except for the soft hum of translation devices. Ambassador Reed, Vale's voice carried across the chamber. Your report on human child rearing practices is disturbing. You allow your young to roam freely, to experience pain, to form emotional attachments. We don't just allow it, Reed replied firmly. We encourage it. It's how human children learn, grow, and develop into well-adjusted adults. A wave of muttering swept through the chamber. One council member, a creature that looked like a walking crystal, actually shuddered. But the chaos. Vale's skin rippled with agitation. You let them fall and injure themselves. You expose them to unfiltered emotions, to failure, to loss. Reed thought of his daughter again, remembering how she'd cried when her pet fish died, how that small loss had taught her about life, death, and caring for others, how much stronger she'd grown from experiencing and processing those feelings. Yes, he said simply. That's exactly what we do. The crystal being spoke up, its voice chiming like bells. And you claim this produces stable adults. Impossible. Show us evidence of this primitive method's success. Reed activated his datapad, and holographic images filled the center of the chamber. Children playing in parks, students working together to solve problems, families comforting each other through hardships, teams celebrating victories and supporting each other through defeats. These are not signs of weakness, Reed explained. They're proof of our strength. Every scraped knee teaches resilience. Every loss teaches coping. Every triumph shared multiplies the joy. Every comfort given builds empathy. Empathy. Vale almost spat the word. You speak of it as if it's valuable. Empathy is a developmental flaw that should be eliminated through proper isolation. Reed stepped closer to the council platform. Then tell me, Council Member Vale, how do your people handle unexpected challenges? How do you adapt to situations your programming hasn't covered? How do you innovate? Silence fell over the chamber. Vale's silver skin stopped rippling. We follow established protocols, Vale said finally. And when those protocols fail, Reed pressed. When you face something entirely new. More silence. The crystal being's glow dimmed slightly. Humans aren't perfect, Reed continued, his voice softer now. Our methods might seem chaotic to you, but that chaos breeds creativity. Those emotional attachments you fear. They drive us to achieve the impossible, to find solutions where none existed before, to never give up on those we care about. Are you suggesting, Vale's voice had turned dangerous, that your primitive emotional entanglements make you superior? Not superior, Reed corrected carefully. Different. But our differences could complement each other. We could learn from you, and you from us. Vale rose to its full height. Learn from you? Your species still carries the taint of emotional evolution. You are unstable, unpredictable. And now we learn you intentionally pass these flaws to your young. This cannot be allowed to continue. Cannot be allowed. Reed's voice turned sharp. Are you threatening Earth's children? We are offering to help them, Vale said. To save them from the primitive practices you inflict upon them. The Assembly has a duty to protect developing species from their own mistakes. Reed felt a chill run down his spine. He'd come seeking diplomatic ties, but he was discovering something far more sinister. The Assembly didn't just practice emotional isolation. They meant to enforce it. This meeting is adjourned, Vale announced. The Council must discuss the human situation in private. As Reed left the chamber, he knew Earth needed to be warned. The Assembly didn't see human child rearing as just primitive. They saw it as a threat, and they were going to try to stop it. The colony ship New Horizon drifted at the edge of stellar assembly space, its massive hull gleaming in the light of an unfamiliar sun. Inside, Captain Mike Woods stared at his U-screen in disbelief as 3 assembly enforcement vessels surrounded his ship. "This is a routine health and safety inspection." The alien voice crackled through the speakers. "Prepare to receive our inspection team." In the ship's main family quarter, Lisa Miller hugged her 2 children close as she listened to the announcement. Something about it made her uneasy. Her daughter Emma, age 8, looked up at her with worried eyes. "Mom, why did we stop?" Emma asked. "Aren't we supposed to reach New Earth today?" Before Lisa could answer, the ship's internal sensors detected multiple unauthorized boarding parties. The emergency alerts began flashing. Captain Wood's voice came over the intercom, tense but controlled. "All families with children, implement safety protocol Alpha immediately. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not." His voice cut off as the ship's communications went dead. The assembly forces moved with terrifying efficiency. They knew exactly where to go, heading straight for the family quarters. Their environmental suits made them look like walking nightmares as they burst through doors and corridors. Lisa pulled her children into the panic room, but the alien technology made quick work of the locks. The last thing she saw was her children reaching for her as strange energy fields separated them. Her screams joined those of other parents throughout the ship. Up on the bridge, Captain Woods and his crew fought desperately to regain control of their systems. "They're targeting the children," his security chief reported, voice shaking. "All of them, ages 0 to 12. They're taking them." Woods slammed his fist on the command console. "Get me any working communication channel. The assembly, Earth Command, anyone." In the midst of the chaos, 10-year-old Tommy Parker managed to hide in a maintenance shaft. His father had taught him all the ship's hiding spots during their exploration games. Now those games were saving his life. Through gaps in the paneling, he recorded everything on his tablet, his hands trembling but his grip steady. The assembly forces worked with mechanical precision, using their energy fields to lift children right out of their parents' arms. Each child was quickly placed in a containment pod, their cries muffled by the strange technology. Protocol dictates immediate removal of underdeveloped specimens for proper isolation training, one of the alien officers announced through its translator. "Resist, and we will be forced to use stronger measures." In the ship's nursery, 2 nurses fought desperately to protect the infants in their care. One of them, Mary White, managed to send a brief emergency signal to Earth before the aliens reached them. Her last transmission was simple but clear. "They're taking our children. All of them. Help us." The entire operation took less than 30 minutes. Parents were left stunned and helpless, some injured from fighting back, others in shock. The assembly ships detached smoothly, carrying their precious cargo in specialized holding bays. Captain Woods gathered his shattered crew and the devastated parents in the main hall. His voice was hoarse as he addressed them. "I've managed to get a message through to Earth Command. Help is coming. We will get our children back." Lisa Miller stood up, her face tear-stained but determined. "They don't understand what they've done," she said, her voice carrying across the silent hall. "They think we'll just accept this. They don't know human parents." Tommy Parker emerged from his hiding place, clutching his tablet. "I got it all on video," he said. "Everything they did." The captain nodded grimly. "Good boy. Earth needs to see this. The whole galaxy needs to see this." He turned to address everyone. "They think they're following protocols. They think this is for the best, but they've just made the biggest mistake of their existence. They took our children," Lisa added, her voice now steel-hard. "And they're about to learn why every species in history has feared an angry human mother." The emergency meeting of Earth's United Council looked nothing like the usual calm diplomatic gatherings. Representatives from every nation sat around the massive table, faces grim as they watched Tommy Parker's video footage of the New Horizon incident. Ambassador Reed stood at the head of the table, his face lined with worry and anger. "They took 342 children." Reed's voice cut through the silence. "Ranging from 3 months to 12 years old. The assembly claims this was a standard intervention for the children's own good. The Chinese representative slammed his fist on the table. This is an act of war. The assembly has significantly superior military technology, the Russian delegate pointed out. A direct conflict would be disastrous. Reed held up his hand. There's more. Our research teams have made a breakthrough in understanding why the assembly thinks this way. He nodded to Dr. Helen Baker, Earth's leading xenobiologist. Dr. Baker stepped forward, her usual calm demeanor strained. We've analyzed the assembly species' biological history, all of them. Every single spacefaring race in their alliance evolved from creatures that abandoned their young shortly after birth. Murmurs filled the room as she continued. Their ancestors were like sea turtles or spiders on Earth. They laid eggs and left them. The young that survived were the ones that could live completely independently. Their civilizations built upon this foundation, seeing emotional attachment as a weakness that should have been eliminated by evolution. That explains their horror at our methods, Reed added. They genuinely believe they're saving our children from us. The video continued playing, showing children being torn from their parents' arms. Several council members had to look away. The assembly has issued an ultimatum, Reed continued. Either we hand over all human children under 12 for proper developmental isolation, or Earth's application for assembly membership will be rejected. They've also made it clear they won't return the children they've already taken. Have you tried explaining our position? The Brazilian representative asked. Reed's laugh was bitter. For hours, I showed them studies proving the benefits of emotional bonding. Explained how human innovation comes from our ability to think creatively, to feel deeply, to care about others. They see it all as proof of our primitive nature. Dr. Baker stepped in again. The assembly believes that proper development can only occur in isolation. Their own history shows that their species survived by having zero emotional attachment. They literally cannot understand why we would choose to maintain such bonds. Then we make them understand, the Indian representative said firmly, not through words, but through action. Reed nodded. I have a plan, but it's risky, and I'll need the council's full support. What do you propose? Asked the British representative. We have something they don't understand and can't predict. Parents who would do anything to protect their children. The crew of the New Horizon has volunteered for a rescue mission. They know their children's routines, their habits. They can track them in ways the assembly would never expect. Because the assembly doesn't understand the parent-child bond, Dr. Baker added. They don't realize that every human parent can recognize their child's cry in a crowd, knows their habits, their preferences. It's a tactical advantage they can't even comprehend. The council chamber grew quiet as they considered this. Finally, the Secretary General spoke. What do you need? Diplomatic cover, Reed replied. I'll return to the assembly and keep them busy with negotiations. Meanwhile, we'll need to get a small team into their space. Parents who know their children, who can track them by ways the assembly doesn't understand. The risks, someone began, are nothing compared to what those children are going through. Reed cut in. Every hour they spend in those isolation pods does more damage. We need to act now. The vote was unanimous. Earth would not bow to the assembly's demands. Instead, they would show the galaxy something it had never seen before. The lengths human parents would go to protect their children. As the meeting ended, Reed looked at the frozen video image of a child being taken. You wanted to see humanity's true nature, he muttered. Well, you're about to find out what it means to anger a species that would die to protect its young. Captain Mark Wells and Security Chief Anna Jones crouched in the shadows of the Assembly's Child Development Facility. Their small team of 6 parents from the New Horizon had managed to infiltrate the massive complex through its waste management system. The Assembly, it seemed, never considered that anyone would choose such an undignified entry point. Remember, Anna whispered, checking her scanner, we're looking for Section C7. That's where they're keeping the youngest children. Mark nodded, thinking of his own 5-year-old son Billy somewhere in this cold place. His parental instincts had already helped him track his boy. He could almost feel Billy's presence, like a compass pointing the way. "They don't have guards," Lisa Miller observed, her voice barely audible. "They never expected anyone to break in." "Why would they?" Mark replied. "Their species abandons their young. The concept of parents coming back for children is alien to them." The team moved silently through the facility's sterile corridors. Their biggest advantage was something the assembly couldn't comprehend: human empathy. They could sense the distress of children, follow the sound of muffled crying that the aliens dismissed as normal adjustment periods. Anna's scanner beeped softly. Life signs ahead. Lots of them. They reached a vast chamber filled with rows of isolation pods. Each pod glowed with a sickly blue light, illuminating the small figures inside. The sight made every parent's heart ache. "Billy," Mark whispered, moving closer to one pod. "Son, can you hear me?" Inside the pod, a small boy looked up suddenly, as if sensing his father's presence. Their eyes met through the transparent barrier. Billy's face lit up with recognition, but he remained silent. Smart boy had learned to hide his emotions from his captors. "I found Emma," Lisa called softly, already working on her daughter's pod controls. During their preparation, they discovered the assembly's biggest weakness: their rigid thinking. All pods used the same basic commands, with no security variations. They never considered they'd need them. Anna kept watch while the others worked. "These pods are networked. Once we free one child, they'll know something's wrong. Then we free them all at once," Mark decided. He pulled out the device their tech team had created, a simple override that would speak the assembly's own language to their systems. Everyone ready. The parents moved into position, each near their own children's pods. Mark took a deep breath and activated the override. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hiss, every pod in the chamber began to open. The children were remarkably quiet as they emerged, another thing the assembly hadn't expected. Human children could understand danger, could be brave when needed. They moved silently to their parents, tears flowing, but no sounds escaping. "Second team reports success in Section B4, Anna whispered, checking her communicator. "They've got the older kids." But their luck couldn't last forever. An alarm suddenly blared, not from their section, but somewhere else in the facility. Something had gone wrong with another rescue team. "New plan," Mark announced, lifting Billy into his arms. "No more stealth. Run." The chamber erupted into controlled chaos. Parents scooped up children who weren't their own. Older kids helped carry younger ones. They moved as a unit, protecting each other, demonstrating the very emotional bonds the assembly had tried to eliminate. Assembly security forces rushed into the corridor ahead, only to find themselves facing something they'd never trained for: human parents protecting children. Their standard protocols proved useless against the raw determination of the rescue team. As they fought their way toward their escape route, Mark caught a glimpse of the assembly guards' confusion. They couldn't understand why the humans were fighting so hard, why they were protecting children that weren't even their own, why their emotional attachments seemed to make them stronger rather than weaker. "They'll never understand," Anna said, as if reading his thoughts. She carried 2 toddlers while guiding 3 more children along. "How could they? They've never felt this." "Their loss," Mark replied, clearing the path ahead. "But after today, they'll never underestimate human parents again." Mentor stood frozen in front of the massive display screen in the assembly's central communications hub. The footage playing across it showed something unprecedented: the human rescue mission, captured by security cameras. But what truly shocked the alien scientist wasn't the rescue itself. It was the reactions of the young ones still in isolation pods throughout assembly space. "Impossible," Vale muttered beside him, silver skin rippling with agitation. "This cannot be happening." But it was. The video of human parents reuniting with their children had spread through the assembly's network like a virus. More importantly, it had reached the development facility's educational feeds. Millions of alien young ones were watching, and something was awakening in them. In a facility 3 systems away, a young crystal being had refused to continue its lessons. Instead, it pressed its crystalline form against the pod wall, making sounds no crystal being had made in 10,000 years. It was crying for its parent. "We're receiving similar reports from all sectors," a technical officer reported, their tentacles twitching nervously. "The young ones are demanding contact with their birth givers." Vale's skin turned a dark, stormy gray. Demanding. They are not programmed for demands. They are programmed for compliance. "That's just it," Mentor said softly, watching another screen where young floaters were pressing against their pod walls. "They're breaking their programming. The human footage. It's awakening something ancient in them. Something we tried to evolve past." Reports kept flooding in. Young ones of every species were showing unprecedented behaviors. They were forming bonds with each other through their pod networks. They were asking questions that had never been asked before. Why can't we see our parents? Why can't we play like the human children? Why are we alone? "Shut down the networks," Vale ordered. "Isolate every development facility." "It's too late," Mentor replied, watching as more reports came in. They've seen another way is possible. They've seen joy, love, emotional connections. We can't make them unsee it. The most stunning development came from the vapor colonies. Adult vapor beings, known for their strict adherence to logic, were gathering outside development facilities. They were demanding to see their offspring. The emotional suppression of countless generations was cracking. "Don't they understand?" Vale's voice rose in panic. "This is how it begins. Emotional attachment leads to chaos, to vulnerability, to strength." Ambassador Reed's voice cut in. He stood in the doorway, having arrived for emergency talks. "What you're seeing isn't chaos. It's awakening." On the screens, young ones of all species continued their peaceful rebellion. They weren't violent or destructive. They simply stopped complying. They stopped learning the programmed lessons. Instead, they watched the human footage again and again, studying how human families interacted. "Your species," Vale turned to Reed, accusation in its voice. "You planned this. This is an attack on our very way of life." Reed shook his head. "No, this is evolution. Your ancestors might have survived by abandoning their young, but that doesn't mean it's the only way. Look at them." He gestured to the screens. "They're not becoming weaker. They're discovering something you forgot long ago." Mentor moved closer to the screen showing the crystal young one. For the first time in its life, it felt an unfamiliar sensation, a pull toward the crying child. "Perhaps," it said slowly, "we were wrong about emotional development being a flaw." Vale started to object, but fell silent as a new report came in. The Assembly's most prestigious research institute had completed an emergency study. Early results showed that facilities where young ones had formed emotional bonds were producing more creative solutions to standard tests. They were innovating, something that hadn't happened in assembly space for centuries. The revolution wasn't being fought with weapons or violence. It was being fought with something far more powerful, the awakening of fundamental emotions that had been buried beneath millions of years of evolution and programming. And it was spreading one child at a time, one parent at a time, across the stars. 1 year after the Great Rescue, Ambassador Tom Reed walked through a very different assembly education facility. The sterile pods were gone, replaced by open learning spaces where young ones of various species interacted freely. Most surprisingly, adult aliens moved among them, offering guidance and something that looked remarkably like affection. "Remarkable progress," Mentor said, walking beside him. The scientist had become one of the strongest advocates for what was now called the Human Development Model. "Our young ones' problem-solving abilities have increased by over 300%. Reed smiled as he watched a young crystal being showing a vapor child how to create rainbow patterns with its crystalline structure. The vapor child's excited response would have been unthinkable a year ago. It's more than just problem solving, Reed replied. Look at how they work together, how they share discoveries. Vale joined them, its silver skin now flowing in gentle patterns rather than the agitated ripples of the past. The Assembly's Council has finished reviewing Earth's membership application, it announced. It has been approved, with special recognition for your species' contribution to our understanding of development. Reed nodded, remembering the long months of change that had followed the rescue. The Assembly had been forced to confront centuries of misunderstanding about emotional development. The evidence had become impossible to ignore. The first generation of emotionally raised Assembly young ones will soon complete their education, Mentor added proudly. Their test scores are unprecedented, but more importantly, they show qualities we have forgotten existed in our species. They passed a window overlooking a garden where several alien parents were playing with their children. The scene would have been impossible to imagine a year ago. The rigid, protocol-driven assembly species had rediscovered something their ancestors had evolved away from: the joy of family bonds. We found records in our ancient archives, Vale said quietly. Before we developed the isolation pods, some of our species did raise their young. We thought we had evolved past that need, but perhaps we had only suppressed it. A small crystal child ran up to them, its facets gleaming with excitement. Ambassador Reed, look what I made. It projected a complex light pattern, then modified it in response to Reed's reaction. This ability to adjust and create based on emotional feedback was exactly what the old assembly education system had prevented. The other species are asking to join our new education program, Mentor reported. Even those outside the assembly. They've seen the results. Reed thought back to the day he'd first discovered the isolation pods, how horrified he'd been. Sometimes the old ways aren't the best ways, he said diplomatically. You're being kind, Vale replied. We were wrong. We nearly destroyed your children with our arrogance. Instead, you showed us a better path. They reached a new section of the facility, where human teachers worked alongside alien instructors. After the success of the new development model, Earth had sent volunteers to help implement emotional learning techniques. The sight of humans and aliens working together to nurture young ones would have seemed like an impossible dream a year ago. We've had to update all our protocols, Mentor said, showing Reed the new curriculum. Adding emotional intelligence, creative play, family bonding time. The young ones are thriving. And the parents? Reed asked. Vale's skin shimmered with what Reed had learned was happiness. They're discovering feelings they never knew they had. Many say they feel complete for the first time. A group of children ran past them, a mix of species playing some kind of game they'd invented. Their laughter, each species in their own way, filled the corridor. It was the sound of the future, of barriers breaking down, of nature reasserting itself over rigid programming. Welcome to the assembly, Earth, Vale said formally. Thank you for teaching us what we had forgotten, that the heart can be as important as the mind. Reed watched the playing children, thinking of how close the assembly had come to enforcing their old ways on humanity. Instead, humanity had shown them a better way. Not through force, but through the simple power of love, family, and emotional bonds. The universe, it seemed, had room for both logic and emotion after all.